Order. Flag. United States of America. To the Republic.
Mr. Holmes. Mr. Miller. Mr. Paradise.
Here.
Mr. Hernandez.
I'm saying it's gonna be on. To the approval of the to the motion to approve the August 2nd, 2022 regular meeting minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of the August 2nd, 2022 regular meeting.
For a second.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
I abstain.
All right, new business. Talking about, I had a meeting with town manager Roche, the building superintendent, dealing care, and the mayor, just to have a little planning session regarding next budget cycle. I want to start a little earlier. So some of the things that I talked about was actually establishing the budget target. You know, they can come up with a budget, but I want to see a budget target. And I asked for a 2% increase both on the town side and the BOE side. I think town side took the directive. I'm not really sure. On the BOE side, I think we're gonna have a follow-up meeting with the BOE. But I at least asked, give me a 2% increase as a target to see what we're going to. We're going to go through their normal process or whatever. So I also asked for, where appropriate, can you do some zero-based budgeting? In other words, just don't come off of last year, especially with discretionary stuff, like supplies or whatever. But in some cases, you know, look at your headcount too. You know, we've had substantial, surplus the last couple of years. To say now that we've had that same opening for maybe 2 years or 3 years, is there a time now to say we really need that? I asked, what we can do it, let's do zero-based budgeting. And in conjunction with that, I also asked, can you really take a thorough look at budget surpluses the last couple of years? Because I don't have a problem that we have, but I don't want to carry that surplus forward, in the baseline, in the budget. Let's look at it thoroughly. We didn't really talk much about capital, work through the capital plan, but the police facility upgrades to be the top. I am the people, keep on talking about, and we talked about stuff, locker rooms and so forth. So really, that's probably going to be one of the top items to discuss. I don't know how much next year to go through and so forth.
As a whole, is the original was 5 million. The words are discussed possibly not doing everything at the same time. Discussion going.
Well, no, we didn't get to that.
Take 1 second to the building. You get that a little more. They have it right now. I do.
The other thing that we talked about maybe some kind of new bonding. That we've been saying no new bonding in the last few years, but depending on what's out there, capital things, maybe. Another piece is that this is a reval, so we need to really understand what that reval means early on in the process to make decisions based on that reval. So we decided that we have a joint meeting between the Board of Finance, town manager, and the Board of Education early on in the process. I want to have it early, but Julia recommended right after the election. Anything else? So we decided sometime early in election we'll have a joint meeting. We'll continue to have a dialogue. this new dialogue. We talked about.
That's not that many years.
I know that Roche sent out a budget memorandum of his staff or whatever. And maybe Kevin, you could share the timeline we put in there with our team, send it out, in terms of the timeline. Maybe put in the budget memorandum. Stuff like that.
So there's a few different pieces to the budget part. There's a fee schedule, which then feeds into fee collections that go to the revenue budget. That has already been distributed, and the ask is to return that by November 30th. Sounds like a long window. In addition to staff proposals, they have to move the oversight board and commission in October and November to buy in. There is the zero-based budgeting document that we have, which basically describes, it insists that they describe what are you doing for the money, right? This money, what is it you're doing? What is it you accomplish? It could be anywhere from numbers, which places like police, fires, like that. But you also have circulating library. It's really bring to light basis like this, what is used for. Any personnel, Roche's directive is that any personnel requests have to be funded with either additional revenue. So there's a limited number of departments who can either drive additional revenue or through restructure. Essentially, if you want to structure your department and stay where you are with the costs, but have additional people, you take that. And then finally, the request was to look at every operating line item, so non-personnel item, expenditure, initiative budget was $25,000 or more, and detail out where that money. There are certain lines where I expect that detail to be pretty clean and simple. Places like computer support. Could be organizations that have existing relationships, but continuing those that we use kind of SaaS setup. Where I think we're gonna focus on, I think there will be some of those areas 3 years. We've seen. And those are services, there's some other budget items where we've seen $100,000 items returned back, and insisting that provide some, where does that number come from? What is the base? That is asked back by the end of September. So there's an opportunity in October through that, ask questions and meet. Then in November is when detailed documents for the general government go out, and that's the full for each department to submit what they're looking for. Roche will review that in January. We'll get updates from the governor in February as he does his revenue. And then be able to for March 1st. One thing I did ask, if you're interested, DNA in January, February, similar to what we did last year with DNA, a couple of others, to meet with you and be able to address operations, data, questions. That way, I know it's an area, hot topic. You certainly see the revenue numbers in the back of this, so I'm sure that will be a top. The ability to ask some of those upfront, hopefully would some of the issues before we submit the budget, but also avoid having to spend too much time on that topic of the voting discuss.
Any questions?
Yeah, in terms of saying wording, that's probably a good idea to get that out there. Side, I'm sure I agree with it. For the dead side, just because of real different. But I do think it's you've established 2% without talking to us. Given that as a direction for them. I think that's something that this group should be doing as a group to set the target, not doing the that part's out of one. But I do think that that's something, you know, we should all volunteer. I have a question on, when you're talking about zero-based budgeting and all of this stuff, and as far as our process is concerned. When the town manager does his budget, that's a recommended. We go through our process by amending his budget. Can we go through our process by saying, okay, we're starting at 0? This department is this department is this department is this.
You could.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately,
But what has dictated in the past the fact that we start with the town manager and make changes to this budget? Just expediency?
well, I certainly think it's more expedient. I also think it's the town manager and his entire staff being closer to the services that are connected to those costs. And not being involved in the day-to-day operations, you run the risk of unintended consequences.
No, but I'm looking at it maybe even from the perspective of taking an affirmative action to build a budget rather than just taking, it may in fact be town manager has recommended, finance budget of 200,000. We said, yeah, we like that. But we build the budget rather than starting with $5 million and say, we want to cut this, we want to cut this. I'm just wondering what dictates. I don't see anything in the charter that says it has to be one way or another.
No, I don't think there's anything in the charter. The one limitation or the one potential unintended consequences with union contracts. Now, you could potentially make cuts that would result in deeper personnel reductions than you may have intended. For example, if the budget was $500,000, there were 5 people, you might say there's $100,000 per person, and I'm going to cut $200,000. That's 2 people. But what you may have is 150, 125. You may end up resulting in, say, 3 people. Or maybe it ends up being a department head, which maybe that's a good thing. The only limitation you would have from that perspective is there are new positions that are listed in the charter that the town manager shall hire. That doesn't mean that the person in the role. For example, the finance director, they shall have a finance director. Technically, there's no shell for the public works director. So laugh about that a few years ago. You could realistically eliminate the public works director, and there's nothing required. Now, there's nothing that says I have that says there shall be, just like there shall be a town manager. Council shall appoint a town manager, but it doesn't have to be. So you could end up with unintended consequences building up from that, but other than those positions have to be in the budget, I don't think there's nothing. Of course, it would probably take considerably more time. You know what I mean? Unless you could sit in a Excel spreadsheet and build it up again. There may be unintended consequences.
Can be something to explore. Be restricted by the charter. So I'm going to be proactive.
It's, one of the questions I have is like, do we ever go through an exercise, get down into the part, it's like, and I know you can't get down to a very detailed granular level, but on a high level, it's like, what do you do? Why do you do that? Why do you have to do it? Is there another way to do it? Is there a cheaper way to do it? Is it even worth doing anymore? What's the return on you doing it? I know some of it's going to be regulatory, some of it's going to be contractual, whatever, but I can't imagine all the work is that way. And we were constantly challenged, like, well, why are you doing this? Just because we've done it for 4 years doesn't mean that there's not a better way to do it. And not that I'm a big proponent of outsourcing, but there are some mundane tasks that probably should be outsourced, and we should be paying people, union scale wages to do it when you can get it done very cheaply. So those are the kind of things that we you just kind of gotta do periodically, go down to that level and ask yourself. You know, you may have, like you said, you may have 5 people, and you may have that unintended consequence if you cut 200. You don't want to arbitrarily cut 200, but you might cut 100 for saying, oh, like it's all well and good, you have 5, but you should be able to do it with 3 with something with an outsourcer. Doing the administrative mundane things, do the things that are of value. You try to identify the work that the town does that anybody can do. It's almost like commodity type work, and there may not be any. I don't know. I'm not privy. I'm not highly privy to what the town does, but you know, I know from experience. Like we had some, you know, people that had just been in the job 4 years and risen up to, you know, labor grade, whatever, and doing mundane things that you could pay somebody that wasn't an employee, even a contract for a lot less money to do. And that's when you add those things up, that's where a lot of the savings come from, at least initially. Once you get rid of all that stuff, yeah, then it becomes tighter, but I don't know to what degree we've actually done that. I guarantee they haven't done it at all.
I would say it varies by areas. And give you an example where we did that, we looked at the billing and collection for Berlin Water. And we had a system that was DOS-based. This was 5 years. It was a DOS-based system designed by 3 people, only one of whom is still alive and lives in Colorado. He's a wonderful man, nice man, great system in the 80s when it was built. So we evaluated either buy it or outsource. For those of you who are on Berlin Water Control, you know that we ultimately outsource Connecticut Water. They have a subsidiary. We were the 21st municipality that they do that for. There was savings, we had better reporting, our collection rates have been stronger. And we had union support in large part because the union president was the one doing the work, saying this is insane, why are we doing it? So that is an example where we looked and said, there's a company that can do this better. This is what they do. It wasn't a huge savings, but it was a decent savings. And it moved us from the 80s to the 21st century like that in terms of technology. The effort of trying to build or even buy and integrate it is just way more than outsourcing. I would say that's probably more infrequent than frequent. But we've done some of that. But I would say that's a fair statement, more than could.
Also, you probably do this as a rule, but it's like, you know, how long do you contract, actually, well, RFPs, whatever.
Some would argue we go for RFPs too much. They would like to raise the threshold. But yeah, I mean, we go out this past year alone, we reviewed and stuff with the auditors, but we went out bid. We put our benefits consultant out bid. We are actually preparing tomorrow to put our health insurance administrator out bid now. We're an ASO provider, so our claims piece of that. But that is fair. We did put maintenance of the golf course out to bid and ultimately decided to stay this year. That may ultimately change down the line, but that was the current decision. We did put the contract for the restaurant at the golf course out there. And the bid is currently on the street for the golf club to evaluate that as well. There's different thoughts on it. So we do that, but there's more of it.
Yeah, I think that we're all aware that we're looking for a little more comprehensive. You know, and I think, you know, Kevin has really explained this. So we're gonna, you know, we're always gonna look to get, like I said, we don't want to tax our people on $2 million. So we want to make
Some
sure
of it is just like, not that anybody's doing anything wrong, but it's just, you got to challenge every once in a while. You got smarter people work for them you think. You know, it's like, if you leave it to them, they can come up with innovative ideas if they feel there's some value in doing it.
All right, number 2.
This is a 2-parter. So on G2 in your packet, Very timely for our discussion. We tried to break down from the audited $18.3 million unassigned fund balance down to where we have unaudited at this point, where we feel comfortable. We turned over the trial balance, turned over a number of schedules, and been working with the auditors. So the first part you're all aware of, the appropriation of pension and the fire vehicles that we did earlier. So on an overall basis, the unassigned fund balance and the overall fund balance of the general fund will be lower, 630.2 versus 630.1 because of those two items. We also appropriated 380,000 into the current FY23 budget and appropriated 185,000 for retiree pension payouts, monthly payouts. All of those reduced where we started from. However, you're looking at the results. Receipts were 992,000 better than budget. Biggest driver of that was favorable tax revenue. The other piece of it is expenditures coming in 1.9 million under budget. As we just talked about, that is not anybody's goal. It's certainly better than having brackets in that area. But it is never anybody's goal to achieve that kind of a surplus. We've seen it across a number of departments that are driving that result. A lot of it has to do with contractual services, has to do with some of the electricity and some of the other utilities. And so one of the things we're looking for in this year's budget is rather than the FY23 budget plus X%, that's the challenge of going back any account that budgeted 25,000 or above. So we don't get mired in, hey, what do you do with the $2,000 of your supplies budget, but actually let people focus on what are the areas where you're spending substantial money, especially in those areas where we've seen the same accounts generating a surplus 2 or 3 years in a row. And that document request went out today, back in early September. So I anticipate that the town manager will be in several department heads to go through that. The reality is, if we just keep taking the budget, or as you said, if we just keep taking the budget and roll it forward, if you had 100,000 last year, you're probably going to make that 125 or 150,000 the next year, and it just keeps growing. And to be able to write down, well, we have inflation every single year, just doesn't cut it because you accounted for it in the surplus you generated last year. So it is a different approach. I'm not totally convinced that every department head will necessarily embrace and execute, but I'm hopeful that they will. And then it's on Roche and myself and some others to figure out, to weed through where somebody has given a good explanation and where somebody is kind of challenged and say, that's not a good explanation, you're going to cut off what you've been asking for.
I guess part of this is ongoing month by month financial reporting, whatever. To what degree is there a culture where they understand that coming in, let's say I got $1 million budget, coming in $100,000 at the end of the year and reporting that change between November and December is not good management. Okay, at some point in time, somebody would say, hey, look, I'm going to be $100,000, I'm going to be $100,000 under budget. And we would, we have our actuals, we have our budget, then we have our year-end projection. So if you're $100,000 over the year-end projection, has been tracking the appropriate way, that money can be reallocated and used for something useful. To what degree does that exist? The worst thing is to have a 5% over budget, unexpected. That's just more for budget or management from your line staff. Should not happen. But I just wonder if we need to look at what that reporting structure is and create a culture that says, you're not a hero when you come in at $100,000 under budget. You're the GOAT, really, because that's money lost that we couldn't use somewhere else or whatever. I mean, that's a riot act that should be read to women if that's what's happened.
So That's a fair point.
But we're finding this out afterwards, saying, no, rates still
Absolutely, and that's the worst part.
kind of bit us in the ass this year.
Now, if they're legit, something changed dramatically, then okay, some stuff happens type of deal, but I mean, electricity should be tracking pretty, you should be able to, I mean, I've got, and I don't know how you guys do this. I mean, do you just say I have a, I'll use simple terms, $12,000 budget for account XYZ. Is it budgeted on a monthly basis, 1,000, or do they actually go through the exercise of budgeting when they expect it to occur? Because electricity would flow that way. Your summer peaks would be higher. You would expect to be using way less in certain months and others. Does it reflect that way such that you can track it that way? Hey, I expected, $40,000 in August. I was at 35. We did really good. That means the weather was good. I didn't have a heavy air conditioning load. So that's, that's money that can be given back in August instead of in December 15th.
It is to a certain extent, I would say, done that way. In part, it is a year-to-date comparison to account for seasonality. The purchase orders are developed, especially on a lot of these recurring items, are developed early in the year. So the expectation of what will be spent is identified. Speaking specifically of electricity, because we have a department heads meeting in September, that's one of the things I was looking at is if you were to look at your budget to actual variance on expenditures, you're going to see some of those expenditures, the electricity expenditures after encumbrances are over $100,000 favorable right now. And that's where the conversation happens during that meeting in September. Is that real? Is something not accounted for? What is it that you expect? Or are you just encumbering because this is a budget, I'm going to encumber the whole amount? And
So what, I know it's a term you guys use when I'm unfamiliar. So what is your definition of that unencumbered that you carry along?
the unencumbered should be budget minus all of the purchase orders that you've taken out, which are reasonable expenses that you expect to incur between this point and the end of the year. Some of
But
them,
they're to be expenditures, I expect, not like unvouchered liabilities.
they could be unvouchered. I mean, if I take out a purchase order, for example, for the auditors, I know what the auditor contract is worth. That's going to represent actuals plus anything that I expect to spend for the rest of the year. So my unencumbered balance would be my professional services minus that full encumbrance, which is actuals plus the balance of the year.
If it's a not a contracted service, you still consider it unencumbered. Because it's still at that point discretionary to some degree, if it's not contractual.
I guess it would depend. Like, for example, electricity, we encumber for the whole year. It's not contracted, but we know what we expect based on history. So if I expect that I should spend $400,000, that number is going to stay there. Now, what we're not getting from the various departments is an adjustment. To your point, let's say it's even. So the amount is $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year. But when we do July, August, September, we only spend $500 each month. That amount should be adjusted to reflect the fact that we expect $1,500 less to be spent for the whole year, rather than leave the $12,000 out there and say, well, it'll just be a good guy that I get in June.
Right, there should be a continually updated year-end projection for everybody.
Yes. And that part of it is, I'm nice to say it's not as robust as it should be.
It's a lot more work to do monthly POs rather than blanket PO.
Well, it's
Probably what.
well, what should happen is that the annual PO, we could do it annually. But that annual PO amount can be removed. That should, so in the instance I talked about, the $12,000 full year amount would be dropped down
Right.
to 10,500.
Don't you do annual POs for stuff like that?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, you would have the same, it would be, I'm looking every single month across the big hitters. The reality is, I have a one pager that covers over 90% of the expenditures. The majority of our expenditure drivers really come down to maybe 15 or 20 actual categories. There's a lot of lines in the budget that really don't drive a whole lot either way. They're not really driving the mill rate, any savings. I mean, if somebody cut 50% off of their supplies budget, we might save $1,000 or $1,500. We don't spend a lot on those items. So I tend to focus on areas like the electricity, the street lighting, telephones. I spend a lot on, obviously personnel is a big one. And it's trying to look at where we were relative to this point in time last year. If we finish the year like we have last year, or like we have over the last 2 or 3 years, where would that put us? And trying to evaluate where that number comes in. So we're looking at a lot of those pieces. That's what's particularly challenging is there are certainly a number of accounts here that drive the 1.9 million. But the reality is there's a couple of handful that drive a significant percentage of that. And there's no doubt we have to get better at identifying that. Oh, yeah. So want to propose using some of this money for some projects that have been talked about for a while. These projects have been reviewed by the council, and there's been some discussions here on these projects. So right now, the plan would be to request non-budget appropriation of general fund balance using 23 balance that would be replaced from the year-end results for 4 of the 5 items at the bottom here. But I don't want to go next Tuesday if Board of Finance has serious concerns or objections. There's no reason to go to the council questions. So I wanted to talk through these with all of you. The first would be to appropriate the money so that by December, in advance of the next rate increase, fire department would be able to put in the order and pay 50% for purchasing the 4th of 4 vehicles that they have for their strategy. These are the 4 vehicles purchased in the wake of September 11th back in 2004. Second would be personal soccer field renovations. We talked about that last meeting. This, along with what is already out there, would give them about $443,000. So it is a substantial project to get in and fix the soccer field. That is a challenge. The police station, in order to move forward, the architects need to move forward with detailed specs that can then be used to go out and put the project out to bid and understand those elements. So requesting $300,000 fund balance for that. And finally, the highway wash bay. This has been around for probably a year and a half now. Public Building Commission has put it out to bid twice. It's actually out to bid again, trying to firm up the costs. What was originally thought to be maybe a couple $100,000 project, we took $493,000 of bond premium 1 year. So let's put that aside, and then whatever's left over, we'll move somewhere else. That project has ballooned to be about 800 to 900,000 with contingency. It's about $1 million. So the proposal on this one is to appropriate $250,000 of savings, to appropriate $264,000, which the town received back from FEMA in response to the August 2020 storm. And then what is already there, the 493, we get about $1,008,000. That project has ballooned for a number of reasons, but one of the big things is there's actually a gas line and a meter on the side of the building. So that has to be moved in order to expand the building to accommodate the vehicles and put it in there and just make it bigger so that doors can be put on the ends. So those are the 4 that we'd like to request that. That has been the open question so far with these projects when they come before the council. Is great, but how are we going to fund this? This is time to answer that question. The last piece is 55 Steel Boulevard, formerly known as 889 Farmington Ave. It's property that the town took through a tax sale. It is contaminated in the ground. It will be bought by Newport Group for a lofty sum of $1. And on that is 76 1- and 2-bedroom market rate apartments to be built. It's basically adjacent to the parking lot for the train station. So it's the third of the 3 buildings they originally proposed doing. We received bids back on putting in the cover underground so that they can then build up above and put it together. Those came in higher than expected. This number assumes a 20% contingency, some additional remediation work, and the high bidder. After doing some investigative work, the town is likely going to go with the low bidder. There's some concerns, those have been reviewed. And the town is also pursuing just under $400,000 of additional brownfield grants from DCD. So if that grant comes through, it is very likely we will not need that. And that's why I said 4 of the 5 we're going for now. I don't want to appropriate $590,000 and then we go and get almost a $400,000 grant and take care of this. So this is to talk about some of these elements. It helps to avoid some of the borrowing. We talked about borrowing for the fire truck. We talked about borrowing for the personal soccer field. We have the ordinances out there to do so. This is an opportunity to take the savings. And
On the 55 steel, are we incurring 100% of the cost?
actually, we're going to incur very little. We have an EPA prog grant that we received a couple of years ago.
Let's put the grant aside and say when we don't have things that we can't let those chickens.
This is that's actually an existing grant. We have. We got 2 grants we already have in place. The third one is the one we're going to have. We have about $720,000 grants in hand from the state
So you poured out the door just for that.
for that piece. Yes.
Not doing anything else.
Well, I mean, they're gonna build it and take taxes.
And this may be beyond where you are, but you said this is the 3rd parcel of the 3rd building. Can they or will they go ahead with the first 2 buildings before this is taken care of?
First building's almost complete. This would be the one that's on the corner by, sort of by Joel's, just up a little bit from Joel's.
Yeah.
That building is almost complete. I believe it's almost occupied. House is going in there and some others. I think there's a lot.
That's complete now, they're actually leasing it out.
Yeah, that's
I
not.
thought we were talking about the residential buildings.
This is the residential building.
Right.
There were 3
Three
buildings.
res,
There was this one, which has commercial and then residential above.
Yeah.
And then there's a second one that they actually scaled down from what was originally intended, but also has mixed use
across the street.
across the street. So the old 903,
So the
913.
residential part by the railroad station, 1 building.
That's the last one there. So we got a little time on that.
And that's what this one.
Well, this is a key step because this will be the cap. What they're intending to do, unless things have changed, here, they will dig in and put the footings in. Then they will put this cap on. It sounds very simple, but essentially you're cleaning out contaminated dirt, putting the cap on, then putting clean dirt on top. Then they're putting the building up, and parking underneath, sort of like the way Century Hills works with their high rise. Parking underneath, it further separates living space from the contaminated property, and then under the cap is where the land will be cleared over. Well, it will probably be decades. You see the new property under, like it takes a long time to clear that out. So this piece has the footings and then the cap have to be done before they can put that up. And this was known coming in that the town would have to maintain ownership. Nobody was going to.
So this almost sounds like a no choice kind of deal. We have to do it, whether we're gonna have no choice, whether we're paying
We
for
own
it.
it,
or grants.
we own it.
Exactly. Yeah, unless you want to leave an open parcel.
Yeah.
Like units.
I would rather have them tax.
And you have residents who, I know there's been a lot of interest in it. You may have existing residents who will sell their property and move there. New people moving into town.
Hold on, man.
So,
Take your deposit.
Yeah.
well, That's not one that I'm asking for right now. That's one to basically be aware of. And then the other piece that I'll just add, and I didn't put it on here, is obviously there are two unknowns when it comes to the police station, which is the Board of Ed storage, and what that's gonna cost, where it's gonna go, how it's gonna be handled, and then the food pantry. Those two areas are to be used under the current design. Those are still open, but considered within a broad complex project. This is just money because we have to do the deeper details in order to be able to go out and bid and get this project moving forward.
I still don't understand why the Board of Ed with all the space they got at the high school can't just move the facilities there. Got a smaller population, empty classrooms.
Yeah, I mean, that's
It's just ridiculous.
we talk about Board of Ed storage, but a big chunk of that are actually files specific to students, and they are referenced on a daily basis. So if they move to the high school, I would suspect the individuals who reference them regularly move as well. That may be a possibility. I'm not close enough to their operations to know.
Take the whole department and do more with it.
So are there other things besides the police station chunk, the actual construction monies that you're looking at that are going to need bonding in the near future?
In the near future, we need to look at the library route. That's the original route there. That's been on the plan for several years. We did have on the plan the fire vehicle, so this would take that off the plan. We went back to last year. We had a joint meeting with the Board of Finance and the council. That was one of the items on there, so that helps there. I would say the police station's the big one. The other one that we're gonna have to figure out is what is it gonna cost for HVAC? We've obviously put away $5 million. PBC is looking to hire construction manager with expertise in that area, and then move forward as quickly as we can on Willard. Cost estimates have come in by a wide range. They could be, in each school, I've heard cost estimates as high as what the police station is projected to cost. I've heard less than half of that at some cost estimates. So I think the biggest thing for us now is to figure out, get the bids out and move on Willard and learn from that to figure out where it is. But I would say those are three big elements.
What are you thinking for a number for next year?
Well, that's actually, for you guys, that's what I was looking for from you guys is we've gone anywhere from the last couple of years, 3 of the last 5 years, we haven't borrowed. And that has resulted in a substantial reduction in your outstanding debt. I mean, I can show you the chart that we typically look at. You're budgeting this line. The green bar was what we looked at. And for those who were around when we first started the Board of Finance, I had made the comment that typically we do this up as 2 periods, or the first year or 2 to get some momentum, the last couple of years to keep the momentum going, because it's easy to say we made a lot of progress, let's jump on it. Town blew right through the first part, and the numbers have just been dropping from 107. At the end of this year, if we didn't borrow anything, 6/30/23 would be all the way down to $64 million, which is a lot of money, but compared to 107, that's a huge reduction. The goal was to get to below 40 as a cap. So you're right on the cusp there. I think there's a compelling argument that could be made to not borrow and try to get to that point, but I don't know how to do the police station.
The fire truck, you're counting this as one lump, one shot deal for 1.1 million. I thought we were talking about doing that over a period of 2 budget seasons.
This would appropriate the money and allow Jim to go out. That's 100% or projected 100%.
Now, does he need that action before he can place an order? He needs an appropriation,
He would need an appropriation because they would insist on purchasing.
but
do that.
we could also do an appropriation through a bond authorization
Absolutely, we have an
without
authorization.
tying up the balance. If we wanted to go with that.
We were doing these, we were appropriating 50%, so we could go ahead and order it. then paying on the second, and then last year when we got the COVID money, we decided to do one whole fire truck, and I don't ever remember deciding we're gonna do the second whole fire truck in 1 month.
Last year, you did two, and paid the 2.2 million paid for both of them.
Right, that's all, but we jumped way ahead of schedule.
Yeah, you did.
I mean,
Because this one can't be delivered probably for what, 3 years?
The next two are scheduled for 2023, so I would say 2024 is a good estimate.
that's
What I
I'm
would
saying.
say on that is if you wait,
We appropriate half this year.
if you wait.
It's not a lot, but it's still 550,000 if we use somewhere else.
Well, we could do it as long as. If he just needs an appropriation in place, we can do it as long as there's an authorization for the bond. Bond authorization, that's either using bond proceeds or other proceeds, and then that keeps the door open.
Right.
Whatever we decide.
Whatever the future brings will cover both ways.
Which we do, I just need to have the audit comes to track the bond ordinance, have to get approved. So, I would say that this year, realistically, with the police station, we're probably about $5 million. And then the library roof is out there as well as HAC. So the original plan was to try to do some of these things. Those were the big
But
three.
the HVAC, we've got 5 million put aside towards that, so,
That one was intended to be June of 2024.
yeah.
Because in summer of 23, the idea was to do Willow.
Yeah.
And then 24, so borrow in June to do the construction work.
Yeah.
And that's another one where if the bond ordinance is approved, we can move forward with that contract.
So what's the roof on the library? I think it's 5. 2 million?
We were the estimate we got was 1.7. And I will say, as far as capital plan goes, Ocean, I had a brief conversation today. Right now, my recommendation is to have a pretty skinny list. You remember a couple of years ago, the recommendation was to fund very little capital. There were only a few items put in there that were necessary for fire alarm and other one or two others, because we had so many previously approved projects. And we said, let's get through these. Because of the ability to get items and people, we backed up a little bit on some of those things as well. Some of those things that you've approved doesn't make sense to keep funding all of these different projects and acquisitions that we can't make. We're struggling to buy vehicles, we're struggling to get contractors in to do work like roof replacements at the highway grounds and water building. So there's maybe another opportunity when it comes to the capital this year, kind of pause a little bit and really just focus on a couple of things that are the big hitters. We can hopefully finish off the fire alarms, the 2 remaining elementary schools. We can move forward with, you got the 3-road project, the Kensington Bridge project. There's a lot of things already in the hopper funding.
So do you want to say 550 for the fire vehicles? And it's function that we made the bond, or we want
It was like, what do we use the other 550 for?
50% down payment?
For the 50% of it.
Well, something will.
Don't know.
So we could always put it towards the police station. The actual construction costs for this kind of bond.
So you just reduce the amount.
Just reduce the amount that we're gonna take out of fund balance. I mean, he's working off the floor anyways. I mean, that's. I wouldn't always argue that we should be down to the floor. In terms of our reserves are here. So I mean, this, I like the way you developed it, it comes down to that, but being one who. It isn't necessarily one hanging out on the bottom rung. Wouldn't bother me if we didn't do the whole fire truck.
And the highway wash pay, has that been now finally gone through full scrutinization and approved to Roche, that's from an operational standpoint?
The bids will be back in It's next Thursday. They're scheduled back in.
Building department is still battling.
I'm sorry.
The building department is still battling. It's a shame too, because you talk to the guys at the garage, all they want is a pressure washer and heater. Literally, we don't need all this other crap, but we're giving it to them.
So that was gonna be one of my questions. I wasn't part of this, whatever. What actual levels of justification come in? Like what cost benefit analysis done, what alternatives are looked at? We always had a couple of different alternatives. First one was do nothing. What's the ramifications of doing it? The next one would be kind of like what you just talked about. What's the skinny way to do it? We get the job done. What's the long-term implications? And then you got, well, this would be the ideal. You know, there's the gotta have, nice to have, you know, whatever. And then the other comment relative to that is when you sort of get through that analysis, say, okay, we're gonna go with this, the bid's at, pick a number, $1 million, then, or the estimate's at $1 million, and later on it comes back at $1.5 million. What level do you do to go back through and walk through that justification again to see if it's even still justified and has anything changed?
Isn't that public building?
It's,
Can they do that? But isn't that part of our role? So we just give them $500 million. The Public Building Commission says, go ahead without
They make a
justification.
recommendation. You don't have-
But are they going to that level of scrutiny?
That's what they're supposed to be. doing.
Okay, I don't
Check
know.
to see
I'm
what they're
asking,
doing.
I'm asking the question. I don't know either. I'm asking.
You have to check things yourself.
Okay.
I mean, unfortunately, because we had this down over the Hubbard paving. $200,000 to pave a playground. Now we did it for $125,000 and we put railings in and we put stairs in. Because somebody went and looked at it with the tape measure and said, are you crazy? So that's where we're at now.
Yeah.
Talk to the guys at the town garage, they go, we want a place to be warm and wash the truck. Just want a pressure washer and a heater and some doors. And here we got town officials, town supervisors, the building department said, we're gonna build an automated car wash for the trucks, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do that. And so, listen, we need a $250,000 building and a pressure washer, and we're at $1 million now. With an automated truck wash, it doesn't wash. And you ask the guys, they go, we can do a better job with the line, we can get underneath the truck, we can get in all the nooks and crannies. We're gonna do something less productive and spend 4 times the money. I don't understand it.
I agree. So, going through the wrong approval process.
Yes.
Well, keep it, this has been discussed, with the council, and ultimately have to approve any contracts. This is Public Building Commission staff, nobody has the authority to go and offer up this contract. This would be to appropriate one. In no way is the council obligated in any way to go forward.
Tim, I will second exactly what you just said. I got the same exact verbiage from the guys at the garage. This thing's being over-engineered and I don't know by who or why it's dumb.
Exactly. The guys at the garage are actually pissed about it. They see you're throwing money in the garbage bin. And here we are, not listening to the guys that wash the trucks.
All they want to do is wash the salt off the trucks. That's it. And not freeze their ass off while they're doing it.
I was gonna say, the incentive in closing it is, in part, big part, safety. By not having it closed, you get ice on the ground when the water's out there in the winter. You have what was workers' comp risk, which from a town perspective, is risk, but just a personal injury, personal standpoint is a risk. It sounds like the consensus would be pull this off the list. Don't ask for the money right now.
I'll go back to drawing.
Yeah. Again, this is why I wanted to bring it up,
This is
because I don't want to go forward.
This is one of those projects too, where there's 1 million state regulations as far as the runoff water from washing. You know, I mean, we think it's a set up a building, but as soon as you start with that, you have to deal with everything that's washing away from the trucks. And all the rules that apply to that I don't know about, but I know they exist.
Well, in fairness, this is the reason they're using the existing building versus building a new one is it already has the oil water separator. We're up against wetlands, so that is critical. It's actually a flood zone, so being able to see it.
Equipment is already in there, that's the thing. And it's just, if you go, just drive down and look at it. I do that all the time. Drive down and look at it. And you go, where's the $800,000 in putting garage doors on this building? Is what it boils down. And that's all the guys are looking.
Maybe the communication back to the council should be where, you know, we think that needs a look.
Yep. Would you like to take the 250 off and keep the 1 in the truck, or do 550 for the truck and take that
Well,
250
it's
off?
not the question on the truck. We're almost 2 years ahead because we bought the other trucks.
In personal soccer field, I feel pay for that rather than when the 300 moves the police station forward.
We have, I mean, we don't know I know the police are negotiating a defined benefits program, so I don't know where that's gonna end up. We may need a little money. So I'm trying to stay desperately out of the whole damn thing.
You're jumping ahead from the finance director.
All right, but anyways. It's, you know,
No, this is good. Thank you. I appreciate it. That's why I wanted to bring it up, because there's no point on the council if there's not support here. I will go quickly through the update. Revenues and taxes came in solidly. They're above last year, which was a good year. End of November is the date for the tax sale. The properties that are currently in the tax sale are posted in the rotunda as required by statute.
anything good?
It's the same. Anything-
There are always a number of good properties at this point. Most of them will be cleared up for it reaches that point.
As the church. Solar.
It's a piece.
Yeah, that. The pension liability, I'm hoping by the next meeting, to have the updated amount, expecting that will be much better. Unfortunately, with the downturn in the market, inflation report today, we probably will see interest rates go up, which will drive that down. The 2% fund is almost completely exhausted. We are making final payments soon on the lighting upgrades in the Library Media Center, and after that, all of that money will be spent. I showed off here everything I unhid the rows from the first year we did this, so you can see all the various projects. Obviously, this was, I think, good use at the schools, priorities for the Board of Ed, and some of the surplus money that they had, especially in the midst of the pandemic. The only other thing I will point out is we have not received the county portion of the ARPA money, which is $1,985,000. That is, vets haven't given it, the state's not holding anything back or anything, which haven't, they gave out the town money, and that was distributed very quickly by the state. Once the state receives the county balance, they have 30 days, and they're always there or less, so I expect to get that money at some point. The chart for the VNA, unfortunately, we seem to be starting on pace to see the risk that shows up on the report. Obviously, I'm calling out another $300,000 VNA risk this year again. I'm hopeful that we will turn that around, but it's still a risk. And then there'll be opportunities to vacant positions. The police department's had some vacant positions. Unfortunately, there were some injuries for officers, one on the job, one not on the job. So
Go back to the meeting. Again, we're starting off time.
Good try.
But, you know, my concern is, you know, in the charter. People have been out more outspoken, the ones that are in favor of not changing. So, as a board, as a town council, they unanimously agreed to the charter, you know, change. So did the charter commission. Did we as Board of Finance ever agree in consensus, all of us, that we agree that we should be a charter?
I'll say this, I spoke on meetings. The last one, I think the proposal was efficient and efficient to everybody. The longest voices cited social media. Who could that be? People should know better, but, unfortunately.
I guess what I'm asking is, can we agree as a team, and all of us, that this change is necessary? I think we've said it in the past, so we agree and documented in our minutes that we
I
all
think we
agree.
should vote on it.
Well, I don't think we can take a vote, no, at least on the agenda.
Right, you could vote to add it to the agenda if you want.
What, we have no. I mean, really, there's no say.
I understand, but I just.
So it's just a note to the town that the Board of Finance is in favor of the charter change to reinforce the,
I'm already on the record. I was on camera. At the conference.
Yeah.
So I have issues. On what math is. Math is insane. But here we are complaining about a little bit more rate to go crazy. But there don't get to be any numbers where it would make you clear your hair out.
Well, whether we do a vote or not, all I'm asking, we at least have a consensus, doesn't have to be, but I think we all we all agree we need to change.
Yes, you change.
You agree, Mark? Hello?
You know, the
second half.
Yes, sorry.
thing I would say about doing the vote kind of thing is. We may have the same concept or the same endpoint, but whether what they're doing with charter is the right way to do it. Is where I think we might have some discussion, because I think they're way too. Non-specific about where the whole thing is going, you know. I don't like the fact that now we're just gonna do an ordinance and maybe we're gonna change, maybe we're not. I know where I want to get to, and I understand the politics of why they did what they did in charter, but that's why I don't want to. But I agree, we need to do something.
The only reason I'm saying do it as a vote is because it's official, it's on record. The Board of Finance unanimously supports the charter change. Because look at it this way, Jerry, if it doesn't pass,
Yeah.
we're right now what we have. And we're not gonna have no opportunity to change it for years.
Maybe.
So. That's what I'm looking at. And we need to support this in both parties,
Well,
you know,
I'm okay with a full consent.
okay.
No, I am.
I just wanted to make a comment about your status report. And that, you know, you sort of go over them kind of quick, the insurance funds. It's very good to see that we ended another year with very solid reserves and balances in those funds. You know, being self-insured, we don't always have the, you know, the good years and whatever, but you know, we have some cushion. And I think it's a, you know, it's one of the things where we got to give kudos to the people that run the funds. You know, that, you know, they're maintaining our balances. And, you know, we're not having to dig deeper into our pockets, you know, to take care of this stuff. So, and I think it is a positive that they're going out to look at administration of the funds and all the rest of it. So, I think you guys have done a good job with those funds.
The only other, you can see the positive one calling out in interest income. Sure, it's not a surprise to anybody. I just wanted to share one little chart with you. The circle at the bottom is when we were doing the budget. We budgeted about 0.2 to 0.3% interest rate, 0.2 to 0.3%. It wasn't that long ago we did the budget, and that's where we were at the bottom. That's what stiff rate has done.
I can't, where is it at now?
It's at 2.27 right there at the end of August. It's 2.33% today. To give you perspective of what that means, we had the very good tax collection rate combined with the ARPA money not having been spent yet, and some other favorability. We had $55,000 budgeted interest income for the year, which was very much consistent with prior year. SIP yielded just under $120,000 in August. So the million is definitely a possibility, and it's not, it's not because of budgeting issues, it's interest rates because of what the Fed has done, it's just skyrocketed. We did pull a good amount of money out of People, which is now M&T. It has nothing to do with the integration. I'm all happy we did that. To give you perspective, we moved several $million out because they were paying us 0.05% interest. As of August, we're getting 2.33, so that we're actively managing to get to that point. I bring it up because as we look forward to next year's budget, we had a few one-timers. Obviously, we had 300 grand of ARPA that was included in this year's budget, 380,000 of fund balance appropriated, as well as 300,000 for contingency. I think the interest is going to go a long way towards allowing us to close that gap. Obviously, we'd love to use it for other things, but there's always that concern with a one-timer, how we're going to replace it. It's on Jerry's mind the moment the vote was completed, how we're going to do this next year. That I think is an opportunity. So if the Fed reverses course, see that happening anytime soon. If they do, that's different. So while our bond costs will likely go up, that is a silver lining. But I think there's an opportunity to really close that. It's a material amount I think to close. And then the last thing, and I promise that it will have one. We do have a meeting about potentially resurrecting the deed plan for the police. We have this now for I think we're approaching 2 years trying to get this thing done. It is next Thursday. Now, Chair and Vice Chair, we're invited, obviously, anybody is welcome to attend. The question that is circulating, town manager has to ask all of you, not by vote or just a general understanding. How much additional costs above and beyond the pension that we pay to the police department today, which is a 12% match against a 6% employee contribution in a defined contribution plan? If the actuaries were to project $50,000 or more above what we pay today in the budget, that's something you would be willing to entertain 100, 150. Again, it's not a vote, and we held to it. But we're trying to gain. At what point are we sort of breaking the bank? Where finance would say this is crazy. Is it 500,000, 100,000? Just to kind of get an idea of what your appetite is.
I think it would be helpful if they saw the same things that we see when we're at that meeting, where it shows, some of the comparisons. I think picking a number out of the year is really hard to do, to say what's our tolerance, because we could say we could afford any number, but then when you start looking at it relative to, oh, well, if we're doing 12%, what is 12%? And where does that fit? I think a little more information would be good before we jump into something. I mean, I've been in support of the new plan, from what I saw, but I mean, we still didn't, as of the last meeting I was at, and I may have missed one, they were still talking about different increments. So I don't know where those increments are, because, if we're going to say we're going to do 16% of something, and when all other departments are doing 12%, well, then that $50,000 increment I may look at that differently, So I think more information, if they could see some of the charts that we saw, I think that would be helpful.
They will rephrase the question. Is there a willingness to pay more than is currently being paid to the police to bring back, not to the police, but to the police plan? Would there be a willingness?
Seems like the downside of doing nothing is we're not gonna hire any cops.
Well,
Well,
we're hiring cops, we're paying them in 3 years.
Spending.
I think that's a lot.
You're going to the department.
There's a willingness. I think
Capture the money we lose.
Yeah.
some of the numbers we're looking at, we didn't want to go too far over,
Right.
budget, you know what I'm saying? 100, 200,000 maybe, I don't know, but The point is, we didn't want to go to 500,000, you know, we want to give a little. But
What were the parameters of the old?
And some of it depends on the fire, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking 12% of base salary, so there's no overtime involved. The DC plan doesn't include overtime or extra duty or anything, it's just your base salary, so you get the benefit one of budgeting. You know what that amount is, you know what you're paying them. Pensions, volatility to it.
I might know a little bit about it, and as I understand it, there's, the cost is not really so much more to the town every year, but the initial buy-ins with the headbutting is right now.
Yeah.
Because we may have to just come up with a little bit of money to get the thing going. And how much we're willing to do that, I don't know. That's not, obviously, I'm not gonna be able to put too much input into
Yeah,
that.
there was some consternation on their part, that two people hired at the same time have different biases.
Which is a legitimate complaint.
And, well, I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't actuarially. You know, and whether the buy-in becomes town liability versus personal item, that's where the whole rub is. I think.
Yeah,
But, you know, I think overall, that's what it takes to, you know, to get people in the door, and it does seem, you know, from meetings that I was at, that they do seem to think that this is a big stepping stone for taking hindrances out of the way.
Well, one other thing that was discussed was the possibility of doing this prospective. In other words, from this point forward, if you're in DC, you can join DB, switch over and go. No buy-in, you just move it from this point forward, and anybody hired from whatever date forward would automatically be enrolled in the DB plan, and you wouldn't have any of the buy-in issues.
well,
On
you
the
would
cer-
have big issues there.
What's that?
Well, if you have officers that have been on for 15, 20
Oh.
years, and you're saying you're gonna stay with the old plan, and the new guys come in and get the new plan, well, those officers that are here for 15 or 20 years go to any other department in the area, buy their time with their 401ks from Berlin and get a pension. So that's starting from this point forward, is a very bad option.
Okay. The other drawback to that, the initial outlay of cash might, on the surface, it look as though, oh, that's less of an initial outlay. You're not buying in. The problem is you don't have assets to start. So your plan is starting from zero, and that means all of that liability starts accruing and you need to fund it and catch up. It actually, assuming no one buys in and you just start from zero, it actually, and you guys saw the numbers, it actually was a greater normal cost, ongoing cost, than if you had assets to start, because you're assuming those assets that people invested will grow.
So what would,
So our costs will be higher.
yeah, so what would be our cost to do, we're responsible for buy-ins?
But I think you gotta get the whole
Picture.
picture.
There's two different actuaries working on it. The union hire one actuary that does it for a living. And the town hires somebody else who I guess doesn't.
Now, the town actuary is actually the premier actuary in the state.
Yeah.
And they actually did a similar exercise with Brantford. They were the actuaries we used. The actuaries are ultimately going to go with, they're going to go with standard assumptions. They all have the same tables. And then they're going to go with whatever assumptions that the town asked them. For example, what earnings would you make on it? Whether there would be a cost of living adjustment automatically built in or not. All the different parameters. If you use different parameters, you get different results.
With the town considering how they procurement forms, if you see officers, especially the one with would like to move forward pay route, or we stick with the first couple of years. Or just go straight.
Well, I don't know that it would be cheaper under the proposed plan. The officer would contribute 6% under either DC, existing DC, or the new bylaw. The variable would be a council. Typically in a DB plan, the member contributes and the employer absorbs the risk or the benefit. There have been surrounding communities who have had plans that are more than 100% funded. It's not to say that it's all down the market. If you bought in right now, and then you looked at it 3 years from now, if you open up a plan in 2008 and then looked at it in 2012, you would probably be well over 100% funded because the assets just soar. If you open up a plan in 2007 or 2005 and then looked at it in 2008, you'd probably say, I was the stupidest move I could have made. So it's one of those things that you have to live with over time and you have to fund every year. It's a long-term proposition. It's part of the reason of doing it is because employees realize I'm not getting a big windfall. I need to be here 25 years to get the benefit. But the benefit I get is I'm going to get a guaranteed paycheck for the rest of my life.
Did the charter revision proposal that said you had to fund the temporarily determined contributions? make it
Yes.
final?
Yes.
But it's in the catch-all. Question 4, part 1 of what 4 or 5 question.
Yeah,
And it's gonna be one that nobody's gonna understand. I don't understand. Have to see how the actual explanations come out as to whether people understand that. Those are not there.
Let Jerry stand in front of the polls and explain
There we
it.
go. It's gonna be busy running between the 3 of them.
yeah.
All right, just one other thing, an action item for me, I know Tim asked you that, I like listing of the items that the Board of Education bought with the surplus that they have, the details, surplus money that they have at the end of June. They bought a bunch of FY 23 stuff. I just want to follow,
They did some projects, they bought some
just want to
stuff,
get a detailed list and so I
very, very
understand.
vague.
Are you reaching out to Julie or do
I can do that. I'll take it. And finally, I don't know if you guys saw this, but the town got qualifying for certificate of achievement for excellence in financial reporting for comprehensive financial report ending June 30th. It's the 36th year in a row, so congratulations to Kevin.
I want you to know I was here for the first,
Really?
I was the auditor for the first.
Show them your age.
I know. Is what it is.
Have a motion. Have a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
Favor?
All right.
Okay.